This is the Wealth Ability Show with Tom Wheelwright. Way more money, way less taxes.
Welcome to the Wealth Ability Show, where we're always learning about how to make way more money and pay way less taxes. This is Tom Wheelwright, your host, founder of Wealth Ability. You know, over the years, what I've discovered is in all my practice as CPA, the single most important person in your financial life outside of your spouse is your tax advisor. So today, you're going to learn how to choose a team of tax professionals dedicated to reducing your taxes. So I'm very privileged to have a very special guest, really a great friend of mine, and best-selling author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki. Welcome, Robert, to the show. It's just awesome to have you on. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Tom.
So right off the bat, Robert, tell us, if you would, just tell our audience, you know, you and I travel the world together, and you're always talking about taxes being so important, and you write it in every book, why the rich are getting richer. You included so much about why taxes are so important. Why are they so important to you? Why is that such a big deal to you?
Well, I think we have to look back in history, because I'm a history buff. And if you look at the genesis of America, it really was a spark called the Boston Tea Party. And it wasn't about drinking tea, it was a tax revolt. So America was founded on a tax revolt, representation, taxation without representation. And as a student of history, I've watched how taxes have, from being fundamentally a tax-free concept of a country, today that taxes in America and most of the world are our single largest expense. And it seems now that people don't even question it. What most people do is they just cheat the government and don't pay taxes rather than learning about how you can pay less or no taxes legally. So really that's why it's important to me, is I don't want people to be tax cheats, because as Tom Wheelwright has taught me, you don't have to be a tax cheat to not pay taxes legally.
Yeah, we had an interesting experience in Moscow a while back. You remember with the entrepreneurs,
right?
So tell everybody about that story. I think that's a great story.
Well, we had this fantastic dinner at this fabulous hotel, and there's some of the most successful, entrepreneurs in Russia, or at least in Moscow, for the dinner. And we were talking about not paying taxes, and there was no response. And the reason there was no response is because they don't pay taxes anyway.
I love the comment. One of our friends made that in Russia, that he said that in Russia that laws are a suggestion.
Right. They don't follow the laws there, and that's Russia. But it's also America, too. Every time I go into an establishment in America and somebody says, if you'll pay cash, we'll give you a discount. Well, that is a tax discount.
Right.
Because they don't have to declare the cash. No,
that's exactly right. So one thing that the question that I get most often when we're traveling, Robert, is, how do I find a good tax advisor? But what I love to hear is the stories about the bad tax advisors, because I think there are a lot of bad tax advisors out there. And you had an experience. You and Kim tell a story about a particularly bad experience that you had with a tax advisor that I think our listeners would love to hear, because I think they'll relate to it.
Sure. I started off as a young entrepreneur, and you don't know a good tax advisor from a bad one. And the plan was, the more successful I got, then eventually I could afford, back then the big 8 tax advisors. So as Kim and I got richer, eventually we had, Arthur Anderson, was that the name of that company?
Yeah. As I recall, the advisor, this is somebody who had been a partner, actually been the tax partner in charge. I knew him. He'd been this is before you and I got together.
To him,
yep.
And he brings in another highfalutin tax advisor out of Washington, D.C. with his tricky shoes and his tricky glasses, and he's a very arrogant little SOB. And he says, well, I've evaluated, your friend and I have, your tax advisor and myself have analyzed your tax situation, and we suggest you sell all your real estate and buy mutual funds. And there was a silence from Kim and I, and we went, Oh, you're kidding, aren't you? And Tom, the sad part was they weren't kidding.
Oh, my heavens.
And I said, don't you see, we pay no taxes because we own a lot of real estate, and we fundamentally have tax-free income. That says yes, 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 but that's highly risky. Our recommendation to you is sell all of your real estate, and then, as you know, we'd have a capital gains tax problem because it would be in the millions because of all the deferred taxes. And then you buy mutual funds.
So like they knew nothing about you. I mean, and anybody who's read Rich Dad Poor Dad, anybody knows you knows that you love real estate. So did they just not know anything about you?
Well, I don't think that is. I don't think they know anything about taxes. I don't care if they know anything about real estate. I don't expect them to know anything about real estate. But I do expect them to look at my tax forms and realize that there was very little tax being paid. We're making millions, and the ratio, I think that time we're probably down about 12% effective tax. And then you got us down to zero. So, to me, that is tax advice. And what he was giving me was, I don't know Tom, what the heck? And this guy was the grand poobah out of Washington, D.C. He worked with the tax department for, Arthur Anderson and all this stuff. What is wrong with that guy?
Yeah, well, that's a challenge. And I looked at that, I heard that story and I thought, the big issue I have with that is that they didn't do really, they really weren't asking you the questions about, what do you want? What are you looking for? What's important to you? And to me, that's a big one. I remember when you and I were talking about my book, Tax-Free Wealth, right? And I remember sitting in your office there, and you were saying, "Look, can you put a list of what questions people should ask a tax advisor in the book, in order to interview the people?" And I thought that was really interesting. That seemed to be like your number one question, number one thing you wanted me to put in the book.
Well, that's correct because I don't know how many quadrillion pages of tax law there is, but the average guy plus the average tax CPA and the average tax advisor or the tax attorney definitely cannot know everything. So that's why the questions you ask in your interview of your tax advisor, be an attorney or an accountant, you really have to understand what questions to ask. Otherwise, you're going to sit there and be impressed with Arthur Anderson or Arthur Young or Ernst & Winnie and all that stuff, and you get sucked right in to fundamentally incompetent professionals.
Okay, so fundamentally, Robert, what are you looking for in a tax advisor? When you've looked for tax advisors in the past, and you and I had this discussion years ago when we got together, what fundamentally do you think people should look for in a tax advisor?
Well, number one is how can I legally pay less taxes? I don't know if your listeners ever heard this, but I've run into, I probably had about 10 or 12 CPAs, guiding me in my development as an entrepreneur. And I would say 100%, except for Tom Wheelwright, wants you to pay taxes. They always say, well, you better pay taxes so the government doesn't audit you. That's their comment. They're more afraid of the government than I am. And I don't, having a rich dad, I really knew that he always challenged the assumptions of his tax advisors. He says, well, tell me how else you can do it. And as you know, we're all human. We're lazy. And we'd rather just give you the pat standard answer and collect your fees and do your taxes and move on. But if you, as the entrepreneur or as the taxpayer, does not take the time to educate yourself as to what questions to ask, then you get what you pay for.
So you're not afraid of an audit?
Well, nobody likes an audit, but as you've taught me, and as my friend Donald Trump has taught me, you always get audited anyway. Once you're in a certain category of wealth, audits are part of the program. In fact, that's why my rich dad taught me. He says, my banker has never asked me for my report card. My banker wants to see my financial statements because that's an audit. The banker wants to audit your books. He said, how are you managing your money? And the average person, even if they have a PhD, they have a FICO score, Fair Isaac Company or something like that. It doesn't measure anything of your intelligence. It just measures your reliability as a bill payer. So that's why, as an entrepreneur, I've really got to be careful who I take tax advice from. But you don't know good advice from bad advice if you don't know what you're looking for or what questions to ask. And that's why those questions were so important to me that you put into your book, so at least the entrepreneur or the person being audited has a chance.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that was I actually think that's chapter 23 of Tax-Free Wealth, and I think that's actually the most important chapter in the entire book, because the reality is, like you say, it's a very complicated tax law. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. Tax laws are very complicated when it comes to the details. The basics are the same. It's a series of incentives for entrepreneurs and investors. And you got to get some education. One of the things I love when we're working together, Robert, is that you're always suggesting that people get educated, even though they're not going to know the details. You're always looking for how do you get more educated on taxes?
Right, and I don't think there's anybody who wants to go back to do what you've done, Tom, and go to
nobody does.
Go to get your master's in tax and all this stuff and teach and all this stuff. So that's why the quality of your tax advice depends upon the quality of your tax advisor. And I'll just say it again, I still remember my first, I think it was Price Waterhouse was my first tax guy. He was a nice guy, but he was just out of school, and he really didn't know anything about real estate. He was a stock guy. And here I am, I'm already, I'm in my 20s, and I have a small real estate portfolio. He knew nothing about real estate. And he knew nothing about business because he was an employee of an accounting firm. And I couldn't understand why he and I could not communicate. And today, after working with you, I understand why. Because we're completely different people. And I say to everybody out there, you can't do what you can't do. You know what I mean? So when people say, well, you can't do what Robert Kiyosaki does, well, it's because you're not Robert Kiyosaki. If you're a person who is invested in an IRA or 401k and you think that is high finance, then you can't really use Tom Wheelwright. And that's where most people are at. They're in their 401ks, IRAs, have some ETFs, and they have a hodgepodge of investments. And then when I talk to them about how I do what I do, Tom, you know this, no matter where we are in the world, when we tell them what Robert Kiyosaki does, what do they always say?
You can't do that here.
Yeah. And I say, you're right. You can't do that here, but I can.
No, it's true, and somebody's doing it, and somebody is doing it here.
Trump, because they have a couple of $1 million in the stock market, they can't do what I do until they change who they are.
That's right.
Is that correct?
No, that's absolutely right. And it's like you say. I mean, you and I have conversations about, new tax laws and new opportunities. I mean, I remember, I don't know where we were flying, but it was somewhere in the Eastern Europe, and we were talking about your taxes on the plane, and you're saying, so what do I do here with the real estate market? And we, I said, well, here's another thing that I wouldn't normally talk to you about, but in this situation, seems like it might work, and it ended up saving hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, I think that what I always love about you and Kim is that you're always asking the questions. And you're always having the discussion. You're always willing to learn. And to me, the challenge that I have with a lot of people is that they are comfortable with their 401k and their IRA. They don't want to learn it. And the reality is, if you don't have, if you don't get some education, no matter what your tax advisor does, there's, a lot of it you have to do. I mean, it's like when you come to me and you say, okay, so what do we do here? And what am I telling you? I'm always telling you, buy more real estate, right?
Right.
So
then just so everybody knows is, there's this new book out called The Curse of Cash by Kenneth Rogoff, Rogoff. And I think is kind of funny is that everybody's holding on to cash, and the government doesn't want you to hold on to cash because they can't trace it.
Right. Right.
So, cash, especially the U.S. $100 bill and now the euro, I think the euro just cut down to $500, is that the government's so desperate for taxes, they don't want you to hold cash.
Yeah, and then the Bitcoin guys, they're going all after them. So they're I mean, actually, there was somebody recently just got put in jail. They got put in prison because they were doing transactions without asking the questions. In your mind, what's the best way to work with a tax advisor? Because a lot of it's up to you. It's not just your tax advisor, but how do you want to work with a tax advisor?
Well, there's an old saying is that, you kiss a lot of frogs to find that fairy prince or fairy princess, you know what I mean? And you have to be open. And that's why with the story of the guy Arthur Anderson guys, they got shut down for criminal activity. Most people don't question the advisor or themselves. And so the thing I say is don't get sucked in by the title or the big name or, this. It really comes, to thine self be true. You got to know yourself. So when a 401k guy tells me they can't do what I do, I say, you're right, you can't do it because you're a 401k guy or you're an IRA guy or you're an ETF guy. You can't do what I do. But if you're going to you want to find out what the tax advisor says, you better find the right tax advisor who understands what you can do. Because most people, as you know, Tom, cannot do what Kim and I do. It's
no, for sure. For sure. And you said something there that I just want to key on is that, find out what you can do, right? And how you can do it. I mean, I always say that, people always ask me, is this deductible? We had that guy in Chile, you remember, that said, well, you can't deduct your car. And then what's the first thing you did? You said, Tom, get up on stage and tell them how to deduct their car. And that was a great lesson for me because, I'm going, well, I got to think about this one because how do you deduct a car when the law says you can't deduct a car? But we did it. And the guy actually came up to us and afterwards and he says, I would never have thought of that. And that actually changed my mind about something because I used to say, well, most things are deductible. Some things aren't. And yet, with that challenge that you gave me, I said, what I realized is everything is possible. Everything is possibly deductible. You just have to think about it a different way. And so the question really is not, is it deductible, but how do you make it deductible? And I want to tell you, I just really appreciate that challenge you gave me down there in Chile.
Well, that's what we all have these brains for, right? And what most people have, they don't have a brain. They turn into Polly wants a cracker. They turn into parrots. Well, my tax advisor says I can't do that. I said, do you have a brain in your head, or are you just a parrot?
That's awesome.
And most people, as you know, are parrots because they just pay the taxes and then complain. And to me, it's just a game to me. How much money can I make legally, and how little in taxes can I pay legally? It's just my game. Some people like golf, some people like fishing, some people like ping pong. I like making a lot of money and paying as little tax as possible. It's kind of my game. But if you want to be a tax slave, then just keep in your ETFs and your IRAs and your 401ks and believe you're Donald Trump or Warren Buffett. Because those guys don't pay taxes.
Well, I would tell you, it's a great game. People ask me all the time, well, why do you like taxes so much? And it's the same reason. It's a great game.
Yeah,
it's fantastic. I mean, it's one of the most complicated games in the world, but it's a blast.
Well, you go back in history and you begin to see the process. Like in 1913, the Federal Reserve Bank was created. Also in 1913 was the 16th Amendment. And if you put the two together, you kind of realize that the U.S. dollar, cannot exist without debt and taxes. So that became my game. It says, how does the Fed print money out of nothing? And then why do they need taxes to collect the payment on that debt? And that was kind of the question. So, when people bitch about the Fed, I just say, be the Fed. Figure it out. oh, that's illegal. And that's Polly wants a cracker. Oh, it's illegal. It's just laziness.
Yeah, that's what it is. That's what it is. So let's go and wrap it up. Any final words, Robert? Any advice you've got for our listeners out there?
No, it's I love working with Tom Wheelwright and my little team of advisors, and it is only a game. How much money can we make? How much good can we do in the world? And how little in taxes can we pay? Now, if you just want to work at a job and not care what your company does or what your company produces, and you like paying taxes, and you like being a pawn of the government, don't listen to Tom Wheelwright. That's all I have to say.
All right. Well, thank you, Robert. Everybody, Robert Kiyosaki, amazing author and teacher. Go to richdad.com and there's all sorts of great information at richdad.com. And remember, at Wealthability, it's all about making way more money, like Robert says, making way more money and paying way less taxes. Hey, thanks so much for listening today. As an additional thank you, I want to give a special gift just to our podcast listeners to help you jumpstart your journey to building massive wealth tax-free. This is a group of not just one, but 5 of my top educational resources on this topic. There are several amazing, helpful PDF downloads and 2 training videos. These resources are not available, and we don't give them away anywhere else. So get these bonuses now. All you have to do is go to wealthability.com/gift. That's wealthability.com/GIFT and get these gifts to jumpstart your wealth now.
You've been listening to the Wealth Ability Show with Tom Wheelwright. Way more money, way less taxes. To learn more, go to wealthability.com.